Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our long-dormant Middle-earth coverage, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of when we finished the books a few years ago.
When was that? Like January 2021?
Yeah, for those who don't know, we started this show...
June, whatever.
We started this show as a Lord of the Rings podcast. We did one episode a week, and we went chapter by chapter through all of the Middle-earth books. The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings. We even did some of the Christopher Tolkien, the behind-the-scenes stuff.
We talked about all the movies, too.
Yeah.
Sorry. We did like a year and a half, almost 2 years.
That's
of
where the name
coverage.
comes from.
Yes, that's
by
why
the way.
and we didn't even used to have these separate episodes about other things that we watch and read and enjoy. We used to just do them in little segments at the end. Do you remember that?
Yes. So we finally got to see The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. That's how I pronounce it. I'm sure I'm wrong.
Some say Rohirrim. I'm going to say Rohirrim. It's more fun.
That's just what rolls off the tongue for me. So yeah.
Also, Tolkien's dead. What's he going to do? Get mad at us?
We finally got to see the movie.
Mad respect to Professor Tolkien.
We've got a lot of thoughts. I think I have a lot to say, a lot more than I thought I was going to. The movie's 2 hours and 14 minutes. I think it's pretty perfectly paced.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about our impressions. Then we're going to do some character spotlights. We're going to talk about Héra. We're going to talk about Helm. And then we're going to close with our expectations, kind of, I don't know, ruminating on that after the fact.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the movie, I imagine we're going to spoil some things. So
a bit. The
short version is we really liked it and we think you should see it if you like movies, but especially if you're a Tolkien fan, it was exciting and we really liked it. So just take that. But
we haven't seen Rings of Power, so this is our first Lord of the Rings anything since we finished our journey going through the books.
Yes.
So we're coming in fresh. We've been waiting.
Yeah.
I've been very excited for this. I mean, we waited all year from that announcement in the first trailer.
I was really excited about it. Yeah. So okay, here we go.
So my impressions, I loved this.
Yeah.
I thought this was a really fun ride. And the first thing I felt when the lights went up at the end of the movie in the theater, we saw this in IMAX actually. I just thought it felt remarkably complete. Yeah. I was so worried that any new addition to this series, I know it's a different art style, but it's using the visual language of the Peter Jackson films.
Yeah.
I would think any new addition to that kind of micro canon would feel terrified, as I would be if I got to play in that sandbox. You'd be worried, you'd play it safe and it would feel redundant. It would feel like a retread of the original story, following all the same plot beats, Gladiator 2. You'd get hit with those diminishing returns. War of the Rohirrim does not do that at all.
No.
And I think the jump to animation is a big part of that.
I think so.
I thought the animation was largely great. I loved how expressive it was. I think the cast was incredibly cohesive, and I really liked the way it was scaled. There were maybe 30 seconds at the beginning where we introduced a lot of characters real quick with funny names, and I was a little worried.
Me too. I was like, oh no, there's a lot of characters.
There were a lot of brothers. They all kind of looked the same. Everyone was blonde, and everything settled in properly.
It did.
I was wrong to be worried about that.
It also felt complete in that it wasn't trying to set up like a new franchise, the way that a lot of movies, Gladiator 2, are trying to give you the Drink More Ovaltine come back next year when we put out another movie. This was just a complete little, not even
side story,
not even a prequel, just like a side story that takes place in the past, and it does make links to the Lord of the Rings story. We get a couple of references at the end, but it is minimal, and it was just like that was a complete story.
Yeah,
you had a beginning, middle, and end, and obviously history in Middle Earth continues after that, but it wasn't trying to get you to come back for more. It was just, this is its own story.
It wasn't member berries. It wasn't Drink More Ovaltine. No. It was connective tissue.
Yes.
There was a continuity within the franchise, but it was never cheap. No. It never went for those easy audience pleasing moments. And I thought the plot developments, and this is where the minor spoilers come in, I guess, I thought they were pretty daring and bold for anything with the name Lord of the Rings on it. There were some, without naming specifics, there were some ballsy deaths that just totally shuffled the direction of the narrative.
Yeah, because the Lord of the Rings, when you think about it, the movies are not that violent. Like, a lot of the death that happens kind of happens just off screen. I mean, except with the exception of like Boromir. But even then, it's just he's stuck with some arrows and he turns a little green. He's fine.
The battles are all big, like sweeping wide shots.
There's not a whole lot of blood. There's not a lot of like aggressive violence. Most of the gore that you see is orc blood, so it just looks like black paint. So it's not as freaky,
Yeah.
But this was like, they're like slashing throats and they're like doing all kinds of things. Yeah.
I found this unpredictable, and that's what I wanted. I wanted a new, I didn't want a new addition to this, but if we're going to have one, I want one that feels unafraid.
Yes.
And this really did feel like a worthy addition to this series. And if it had set up things, in the last couple minutes, I would gladly watch more of these. I'm more impressed that it is a functional standalone.
Yeah.
But if this had been a trilogy, I would be psyched right now for the next two. Because on a macro scale, I realized this after the fact because I was so satisfied. I was just trying to I was questioning how happy I was.
Yeah.
This plot is basically everything I love about fantasy. And I know you're going to diverge from this, but let me lay out mine first.
Oh, okay, sure.
I think this is basically everything I love about fantasy. It doesn't have overblown magical elements. The most magical thing in this movie is that the elephants are fucking tanks.
Also, the stuff with Helm, because he's kind of
Barely.
undead and can punch people
It's
to
a
death.
little surreal. It's a gesture. It's not a magic system. The eagles are
Right.
there, but they fly people. They're a taxi serve. They're an Uber.
And they're just part of the world. Like
It's not magic cheat codes, because I think the more magic you have in fantasy, you lose me. So there was no overblown big magical element. I loved how much palace intrigue. This was about shocking deaths and betrayals and grievances, sweeping military campaigns,
heirs to the throne, all that kind of
breathless
thing.
chases, brutal, like real-time feuds with families. It's not, the Starks and Lannisters hate each other. Why? Who knows? It was, you see the like original sin that breaks up these major families, and you see why they hate each other. You get these great single combat moments. On a macro scale, you get the good versus evil. The way I made sense of this, for me, is that this felt simultaneously modern and classic, and I think that's a really difficult needle to thread. This movie's called The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. You're going in there reminded, not just by the art style, but literally by the title, of Tolkien.
Yeah.
But this didn't feel like it was just Tolkien, because you and I, look at the journey we went on after we finished the Tolkien books, going through the Witcher books and now going through Game of Thrones. Very different appetites in modern fantasy. Very different tone. It's less faded. It's less promised and destined
and romantic and heroic
and honorable. And honorable.
Right.
The thing I love about War of the Rohirrim is that it does thread that needle. It has Lord of the Rings style heroes fighting Game of Thrones style villains.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
And the soul of Tolkien is, for me, the aspiration of those heroes.
Yes, yeah,
It
agreed.
is the consistency, the confidence, the just the will to create a better future. But having these much more hard-edged villains, I thought that made it feel fresh while still within that lineage of Tolkien.
Totally, because the biggest weakness that Tolkien's story has is that Sauron is not a good villain. He's a great big bad, I suppose, but he has no depth. There's nothing interesting about him. He's just evil because he's evil. I mean, Gollum is a better villain than Sauron is.
Sure.
Because you understand his arc, you see his downfall, you see his fall from grace.
The grayest character fantasy's ever had.
Yeah, literally. But but so that's like his one flaw, I think, of his story. And Tom Bombadil, but we won't talk about that.
Tommy to Bomba.
Tommy to Bomba. But fight me in the comments below. It's fine. But here, our villain Wolf is a fantastic villain, and so he like if that's the missing link in Tolkien, we get him here, and so then it feels wonderfully complete. Because you see his whole arc. He's childhood friends with Héra, our heroine, and then he becomes emboldened by and
embittered
by the death of his father, and so then he becomes worse and worse and worse.
But he breaks bad like 6 different times.
Oh, yeah.
And all of this story is rendered in this kinetic, beautiful, action-packed art style. This was just a great theater experience.
Oh yeah, it really was.
Do you have any other impressions to add to this?
I don't remember what other things we're going to get into. I don't want to step on any of our other segments.
Héra, Helm, and Our Expectations.
Okay, so we'll get there. I thought the music was fantastic. Obviously it uses themes from the original Peter Jackson movies.
It built on Howard Shore.
Yeah,
Sure.
It really, really did. But I thought the additions made were wonderful. I recognized that like Héra's theme and like Helm's theme, and I recognized that they had their own musical elements, and I thought it all worked together really well. I loved the way the animation translated the visual style of Peter Jackson's live action films into this style of animation. I thought it was wonderfully done, and I think the visual language of the Peter Jackson movies is perfectly suited for this kind of animation. Japanese animators love like Western medieval fantasy. Like, I mean, play any Final Fantasy
Look at
game.
From Software making Dark Souls and Elden Ring.
Exactly. Yeah. Like they love it and they do it really well. And I loved seeing that here. I thought it looked so good. And I think also we had talked about this anime style of animation where it's how many frames per second?
15 instead of traditional Western closer to 24.
Yeah. So like if you're not used to watching anime, your Western eyes are like, why is it so slow and like jerky?
Choppy.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But you get used to it after, 5 minutes, like grow up. But I thought it worked so well for this because it meant that everything feels like, especially in the big battle scenes, it's almost like stuff's in slow motion. And so it feels so dramatic.
The action looked
and
incredible.
Heroic. And you had these, and like the costumes and the hair lent itself to, again, this anime style where like the cape and the hair is flowing behind the characters and it feels like they're in a panel of a comic or a manga, and it feels so dramatic and romantic and sweeping, and I thought that was perfect for this story.
Can we do a 30-second sidebar before we jump into Héra and Helm?
Yeah, sure.
So we've dedicated a great portion of our lives every week to doing this show and to celebrating and analyzing art, and we would never waste our time or yours on culture war bullshit, but I want to take like 10 seconds to talk about the bad apples at our showing of this movie.
Oh my god.
We're an IMAX screening, maybe 15 people there. Not a great sign.
Yeah,
but who cares?
I mean, it was
5:30
on a Tuesday, so
it was. Yeah,
but,
we went to the first one.
Yeah.
But there were two pairs of just pricks at our IMAX screening who were not just literally scoffing, but tut-tutting throughout this 2 hour and 14-minute movie. They were just so horribly behaved and entitled and snide and
gross.
Miserable. Just despicable behavior. So obviously that's bad apples. That is not the whole fandom. There's bad apples in every community that's ever formed. But
yes.
I just wanted to take a second to highlight a couple of shitheads.
Well, and what they were scoffing at was a lot to do with Héra.
Every time a woman did everything. That's why I wanted to transition into Héra.
Perfect. That's perfect because I loved Héra.
Me too.
I think in the year of our Lord, this is coming out in 2025.
It is indeed.
We're tired of the girl boss. I get it. I'm tired of the girl boss. I've been force-fed girl bosses for the last 15 years. I mean,
force-fed. No,
and I get it.
Yeah.
And the first time you see a girl boss when you're 13, and it's can't even think of a good example. I don't know. I guess you see Arwen for the first time. You're like, hell yeah, women can be strong, and like that idea is tired.
Katniss is cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like Katniss is the coolest thing you've ever seen when you're 14 and you read Hunger Games for the first time, and now you're like, yeah, I get it. I'm a woman and I can do anything. Like that's cool, great, whatever. But this did it so well because it felt, do you know why? Because it felt like the way Peter Jackson did it with Arwen and Éowyn in 2002. Like
it wasn't girl bossy. It was
no,
like,
it wasn't.
That term is a derisive term,
right?
About the pale imitations of great female characters.
Yes, because
who are strong sometimes in a way that is traditionally more masculine.
Yes, because to me, because a girl boss is a female character, a woman who is just written like and acts like a man, but is somehow like 5'3" and 95 pounds and looks hot while doing it and is mean to everybody. That's a girl boss, and that's not a real person. That's not a real character, and that's not something we should aspire to be.
But that's we've gotten a Boy Who Cries Wolf thing where there's a large portion of the people who talk about movies and art and games and stuff online where every time they see a woman especially in a franchise they already like,
yes,
they ascribe the girl boss tag.
And they're like,
all of the baggage.
Now there's a girl boss here. Yeah, and so then it gets ugly.
Yeah,
and that's what these dudes were doing in this theater.
Yeah,
and
multiple
instead,
groups of them.
But Héra was not that. Héra was this, fighting against norms, very strong. Not necessarily like in a masculine way, but strong in what she wanted, strong in her motivations.
Conviction, not physicality.
Yes, and she was a good rider, but of course she is. She's from Rohan, so she learned how to ride a horse before she could walk. That makes sense. She's this strong rider. She's fast. She's determined, and she's really she loves her family deeply and is really and cares about keeping them safe and protecting the people of Rohan. And she is the hero of this story. She like avenges her family and does all this stuff. But you know what? At the end, they don't get to say, you know what, Héra? You get to be the queen of Rohan now. Because no, of course that doesn't happen, because they live in like patriarchal medieval England basically, and her cousin gets the throne. And like, that sucks for her, but of course that's what happens because that's the world she exists in. It would be very weird if they decided to go, you know what? F the patriarchy, let's have a woman in charge now, because that wouldn't happen. And I like that they let her be strong and amazing and groundbreaking in the world she existed in, but that the entire structure of the world didn't change because of one person.
In our current lingo for the stuff we're talking about every Friday now, War of the Rohirrim was much closer to Fire and Blood than it was to House of the Dragon.
Oh, yeah.
If you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean.
if I were to try to boil it down to one word, the reason I really liked Héra as a protagonist here was yearning. Because I thought she was constantly defined and redefined by her ancestry.
Yeah.
By all of her absent family members, this long, out-of-reach lineage where she was the last one of the Siege Maidens.
Shield Maidens.
Shield Maidens.
Sorry.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Where we're constantly explaining this. I mean, I feel like it is sort of an aside to ward off any of those accusations of, girl boss or whatever, whatever you want to call it. Where we're constantly reminded that the Shield Maidens were the women. After all the men died in war, the women had to take up arms and defend the clan.
Yes.
So we're constantly explained like why this is happening.
Why it's women. Yeah.
Where it's not this historical
It's not just
inaccuracy.
women achieved enlightenment and they became men. That's not what happened, because that's not what it means to be a strong person.
But it wasn't just stating that. It was folding it into the characterization, where there is this ache of wanting to live up to these admirable, strong, noble women, as well as trying to live up to her father and all of the men in her family. It wasn't gendered in a way that felt exclusionary, and I don't think the character ever felt overpowered. That's another thing people talk about with these type of this kind of modern archetype.
Yeah, they're not real people. Yeah, they're just superheroes.
They're good at everything without training.
There's no struggle.
They're just naturally good.
Yeah.
I loved look, for me, Héra was great because she passed the Tom Cruise test, where you get the shit beaten out of you, and the testament to her character is that you just keep getting back up again.
Right.
She was constantly challenged and scrappy. She lost a lot of fights here. And the ones she won, it was because she was smarter.
Right.
It was
not
because
she was like stronger. Yeah.
In a desperate moment of struggle, she had like one flash of an idea. But it wasn't snooty. It wasn't aloof. She wasn't moonwalking through the movie.
No.
She was uncertain but aspirational. And that's the heart of Tolkien for me.
Yes.
There was so much heart. There was so much yearning. There was the romanticism. I just thought, regardless of gender, I think she was an excellent fantasy lead with a great character design. I loved her hair.
Me too.
Those like key outfits that she
her outfits
rewears.
were cool. Yeah.
I just thought she was a great character.
Yeah, because Tolkien's heroes aren't overpowered. None of them are. They all struggle. I mean, his biggest hero is, Frodo Baggins, who is a small, insignificant hobbit from the Shire.
Who's dying the whole time.
And who deeply struggles the entire time.
Yes.
Sam, same thing. I mean, even Aragorn, who's like arguably your other hero, and he's beefed up even more in the movies, but he struggles too. Like, he's not just this great overpowered guy who just zooms right in and kills all the orcs and it's all fine. Like, everybody struggles and keeps getting knocked down, and they still maintain their idealism. They struggle with it, but they don't become villains in the process. Like, you can argue somebody like Katniss, for example, if you want to go that route, who's a great character. I love her, but Suzanne Collins is doing a very different thing.
She's not Tolkien.
No, this is a girl who is like a product of horrific circumstances and has to become this like killer basically to win, and she becomes the face of revolution but doesn't really believe in or care about it. She's not idealistic at all. She's actually very negative and doesn't really like herself and doesn't really care about anybody except like her core family unit. She doesn't care about the people of Panem. She just kind of gets forced into caring about it, and that's a totally different thing, and that's fine. But Tolkien's characters don't do that, and I think a different version of this movie would have Héra, become this badass bitch who like aggressively kills all the bad guys and like, becomes the baddest bitch in Middle Earth and like becomes bitter and nasty and like gives up and doesn't have any idealism anymore. She's like, well, that was the old world that my father lived in, but this is a different world.
The
it
scolding thing.
Yes, it would have been a very different thing.
Yeah,
and
Tolkien is about yearning.
Yes,
because that same ideal that Aragorn is reaching for, that's the same ideal that Boromir fails to reach for. The yearning means that the ideal is just beyond your reach. And it's that grasping, it's that aspiration. That's, I think, where Tolkien lies. And that's where Héra exists too.
Yes,
I thought she was a fantastic character.
She fit perfectly into this story, and I liked that it was a girl. Number one, I mean, I'm a girl. I'm a woman. I care about that. But like, it was a nice change because most of Tolkien's characters are male, and that's fine. But it was a nice, like, refreshing, new thing. But it still fit in perfectly. Nobody was trying to correct Tolkien. Nobody was trying to like fix his mistake of not having good female characters.
Yeah.
I never got that sense. And that was great.
I think there's an interesting kind of trap on the other side of that problem, if you want to call it a problem, because there are so many well-defined male archetypes in Lord of the Rings that if you tried to introduce a new protagonist in that world, they would immediately be classified as, oh, this is just a shitty version of Boromir.
Yeah, it's another
Gimli,
Legolas.
Or Legolas, or probably Aragorn.
Yeah, right.
Like, this is a nice way to bring something fresh, but still within the lineage, still true to this series.
Especially because Rohan is obviously very important in the Lord of the Rings story, but not as much as like Gondor or the Shire or something. And so doing this felt, again, separate enough, but still like it was important. It was the exact balance of new and old at the same time.
It threaded the needle. It felt cohesive. So the other big character I wanted to put a spotlight on is Helm.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously this was an early favorite going into the movie. I mean, I learned to love Héra. I kind of fell in love with that character, but Helm I was locked in from the first moment.
Sure.
Because I love Brian Cox. Everyone loves him now because of Succession, but I know him from 100 other things back through the Jason Bourne movies and Deadwood and a million other things.
Yeah, sure.
I loved his performance here. I don't know if he's ever done voice acting before.
Yeah, except for the McDonald's commercials.
But the character design was so aligned with his vocal performance because the character design, he was like carved out of granite. He's thick.
He's a big boy.
He's dense and he's so intricately detailed. All of the close-ups on his face with that flowing, beautiful hair and all these hard-edged, like dwarvish, kind of brutal features. Yeah. You could just tell the animators really enjoyed their time with Helm. And like those elephants we mentioned before, he's built like a brick shithouse. He kills a guy with a fucking punch.
He's a tank.
And then he does it later like 12 more times. And it's still awesome.
It's always
great. And it's still believable because he's built like Hellboy. I loved... I mean, you're introducing him as this bruiser, as this big, stubborn, tough guy.
Right.
And that could have been his whole character. And if it had been, you could point to 100 characters in Lord of the Rings who felt like that too. Maybe he's Big Gimli. Like, there's a way he could have been a simple character. But the thing I love about this character is that he wasn't ever simple. I loved the way his rage and violence developed throughout the film. I thought Helm was kind of the center of the best character work. I think Héra was the most quick on its feet character work that we saw in the movie, avoiding all of these sort of pitfalls and expectations. But when Helm kind of disappears from the narrative for a while and there's this rumor of him existing as this wraith,
oh yeah, that was
fighting
awesome.
all of and killing all these guys in the night, and he's a shadow, he's like the ghost of Winterfell, or all of these other kind of fantasy corollaries. He almost, for me, and this is where I talked about everything I love about fantasy, everything I love about storytelling goes back to Shakespeare and Marlowe. And I loved that we took this big-ass Brian Cox Helm Hammerhand character, and for like 20 minutes we turned him into Hamlet Sr.
Yeah, that was
like
really
the ghost
cool.
of Hamlet's father.
I really liked that.
Which enriched Héra as well.
Yes.
But then we got to bring him back to this more grounded human place too. Like, in equal parts, a character built on rage and violence like he was, who was such a strong-headed leader, I found him equally righteous in certain moments and wildly frustrating in others.
Yeah.
Which is how you should write a character like that.
Well, and when you see him like breaking down when his sons are dying,
sure,
or have died already, spoiler, but like he's got this great human moment. It's not just him being this angry guy. Like, he, in front of all of his people and his enemy, breaks down and collapses in grief. Like, that's awesome. I really like that.
And there's
a
lineage
choice
of that too, when they all think the hobbits died. Like, there's plenty of that already in Tolkien, that kind of heart underlying it. But for having a character be such a pig-headed bruiser, for having him confidently make the wrong choice multiple times, and seeing that kind of quiet frustration that Héra had, I loved that they made him a complex leader.
Me too.
He wasn't always wrong, and he wasn't always right. We were kind of watching the calls go both ways. He wasn't a simple leader. He wasn't a simple father.
And he wasn't like an ideal that Héra was always trying to live up to. He was like a real person.
Yes, he was complex.
Yeah, and she wanted to be as good as he had been or even better, but it wasn't like, oh, he was perfect and now I have to do that.
And if you want to compare it to the conversation about Héra, I think Helm was equally complex as a leader and even as a father and a man.
Right.
I thought he had just as full and rich an arc as Héra did.
And like Héra and like all of Tolkien's other heroes, he wasn't overpowered. I mean, his punches were, I guess, but he still struggled and, didn't come out on top at the end. He's dead by the end.
Right.
So I liked that.
And I was talking about that kind of trap of having a new strong guy character in a Lord of the Rings thing. I was so worried that he was going to be a Theoden knockoff.
Yeah, but he wasn't like Theoden at all. I mean, you saw some crossover, I guess, like especially with them losing their sons, but...
And there was that other guy with the two-tone beard dressed like the Keebler elf.
Oh, yeah.
There was another guy who kind of looked like Theoden.
Yeah, but that was just like the visual language carrying through.
But again, and this is how we transition into talking about expectations and wrapping this up, Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim never cheated. I don't think it ever felt like it cut corners.
No, I don't think so either.
Going into this movie, from the announcement to the trailer to the poster, like every step of this, it's been like the Jaws theme playing in the background, where you and I were both uncertain and nervous about this.
I was really nervous.
And this was just a lovely surprise.
No, I really didn't. I expected that I would enjoy it on some level. Just, I mean, for the visuals alone and for being getting to be immersed in the world for 2 hours. I knew how to enjoy that, but I was pretty worried that it would be disappointing, or that it would do some of the things that we hinted that the movie could have done, or that it would just be boring or redundant or uninteresting, or like, yeah, this is great, but like, I wish, Aragorn was in this, but It wasn't that at all.
Like, if you left the theater thinking, shit, I should have just stayed home and watched one of the other movies, that would have been a failure for me.
Right,
I think
exactly.
that's kind of where my standard was.
But instead, I left the movie thinking, I loved that, and now I want to go back and watch Lord of the Rings.
And like I said before, I left the theater thinking, hey, I would have watched more of these.
Yeah. Not that I want to watch Lord of the Rings instead of, but like now I'm back in that world and I'm loving it and I need more, It
was a rich addition to the series. It's such a tough task, and I think the team really nailed it. But I want to end this with a comparison.
Oh, okay.
Which I think might help us make sense of our feelings here, because I'm thinking of War of the Rohirrim as sort of a companion piece to Furiosa.
Oh, okay. Mad Max, yeah.
Right, where they're both big swings, big additions to a franchise that
prequels
are arguably unnecessary. Like,
totally,
they fill in some gaps, but they're not make or break for the grander narrative.
No, they're not.
The kind of global narrative.
The regular story can live on its own without these additions, yeah.
Both movies are arguably a little too long.
Yeah.
Maybe more so for Furiosa, but I think I really respect both of them because they are such full-throated new entries to a franchise that managed to do that impossible thing of capturing the soul of the original while bringing something new that didn't clash. Like, I stand by both of these movies. I think there's an interesting symmetry there.
That's funny. I like that comparison, and I think War of the Rohirrim is much more successful than Furiosa is. And I don't mean box office. I mean like for me and like what it's accomplishing artistically. And I think that Héra as a character is rendered better here than young Furiosa is. I think
headcanon, the other thing I was thinking of is that Furiosa for the longest time was supposed to be animated.
Oh, that's right. I think that would have been a little bit better, but it's fine. I mean, at this point, I'm always pro animation because Disney is doing its very best to kill animation.
And do we need to make Ian McKellen walk through the woods for another 6 months?
This poor guy. Yeah. Just
put him in the booth.
Let him sit down and record his lines. Like, come on. Give him
a
break.
A great time with this.
I did too. Yeah, no, I that Furiosa comparison is fun. But no, I was nervous about War of the Rohirrim because I heard it wasn't doing very well, like box office wise. Like people just like it just wasn't doing very well, and I was like, well, that's disappointing. I figured like people will be ravenous for this. It's Lord of the Rings. Everybody loves that. So and then I thought, oh no, maybe it's not very good, But that just goes to show, don't listen to that. Just if you're interested in something, go see it.
Go watch Megalopolis.
Who cares what other people think? Except for us. You should care what we think. And we think it was great, and you should go see it.
And if you want more Tolkien coverage from us, as we mentioned at the beginning, there's a whole pantheon in the back catalog. Some of that is over there on Patreon, which is we've had that going for years. There's a whole cavalcade of bonus episodes of fantasy content, of talking about movies. There's a whole pile of bonus episodes over there. $2 a month, you can support the show. But the other thing you can do for us is check out my latest novel and audio drama, Lemon Tarts in Space.
It is a rip-roaring, delightful, light sci-fi dark comedy. It's an audio drama. It's a novel.
It is, the way I pitched it in the description that you'll see if you click on the links, is if Monty Python did Alien.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to think about it. And like, I want y'all to know, I've said this before, but if you haven't heard, I'm not really a sci-fi person, okay? But I loved this. It's like perfect if you love sci-fi and if you don't like sci-fi. Like, that's why I like it.
And she's not biased at all.
No, I'm not biased at all.
She doesn't have a cameo in the audio drama.
I don't even know who this person is that I'm sitting next to, who I live with and am married to. Whatever. It's great. Check it out. Lemon Tarts in Space. It's available everywhere. Just click the link. You'll find it.
Thank you very much for listening, for supporting the show.
Let us know what you thought. Sorry, of this movie. I'm just excited. Let us know what you thought of Lord of the Rohirrim. Lord of the Rings.
Right at the finish line.
War of the Rohirrim. Tell us. We've just recorded a whole other episode before this, okay? So we're doing great.
And we'll see you in just a few days for another brand new episode.